Just before we begin the formal proceedings, I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to recognise that sovereignty of this country has not been ceded, and I acknowledge the continuous cultural heritage of the Wurundjeri people and their continuing connection to land, water and to country. I'd like to pay my respects to Wurundjeri elders past, present and emerging elders, and I'd extend that respect to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are in the room today from other communities. I'd also like to thank RMIT for partnering with us on this event and giving us this excellent room, even though I'm squinting because I've got the sun in my eyes, so just forgive me. DVRC have an ongoing partnership with RMIT, and they've been generous enough to give us their spaces on a number of occasions, and so we'll be holding all the PIP seminars that we can in RMIT's awesome buildings. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister for Women and the Prevention of Family Violence, Minister Natalie Hutchins, who's here with us today and who I'll introduce formally, who will talk a little bit about the Partners in Prevention Network in a minute. So this is the third of the PIP seminar series, which has been a really great success so far. If you've missed either of the other two events, you can find the videos from them on our YouTube channel, and a video today will go up as well. And we are also testing out our live streaming for the first time for our regional and rural members to make sure that they've got access to the PIP network without having to come into Melbourne. I'd like to welcome those of you who are watching online and hoping that you have got both sound and audio and visual. So as you may know, one of the reasons that we deliver these seminar series is to hear and learn from all of you, as well as from our guest speakers, and then to take what we hear in these forums and pull them into a practical, evidence-based resource for practitioners. So as such, today, one of the things that we are launching is our new, our fourth PIP tip sheet on supporting schools to engage with parents. All four of the tip sheets are available on DVRC's website, and there's hard copies of the newest tip sheet on the registration table if you didn't find it when you registered today. Our two pilot communities of practice, one of which is face-to-face and one of which is online, will be wrapping up next month. That's been a really, really great process for us. It's a different way. We're testing this year and next with the expansion of PIP, different ways of doing things and trying to have more engaging and more diverse ways of working with our practitioners. And we've had a really, really positive response both to the online and the face-to-face communities of practice, which really shows a need for those sort of tailored capacity building activities. So we'll be using the evaluation to help us make something like that available for as we continue to expand PIP going forward, and we'll have some of the evaluation results ready for you to be able to see once the project has been finalised for this year. For those of you who have been connected with PIP for quite some time, you will know that we have two prevention specialists who are located in the DVRC offices, who are there to give you information, advice, to connect you with other practitioners. They are kind of, we like them to be the holders of the on-the-ground knowledge that's happening in local communities, and they're there to, test out program ideas, to provide you with information, advice, or to connect you to other sorts of resources, whether those are PIP resources or other sorts of resources. So Emma and Louise, and you can email them, all of our contact details are on all of our publications. You can get in touch with them, and so please do use them as a resource, because that's what they're there for. So I'd just like to introduce the Minister now, who will be coming and to speak to us. Minister Hutchins has always been a fierce advocate for gender equality, workers' rights and for social justice. As a former union organiser, Minister Hutchins was the first and youngest woman to be elected the Assistant Secretary of the Victorian Trades Hall Council, and she was a senior advisor to Steve Bracks, a former Premier, and championed affirmative action in the Australian Labor Party, which has seen the highest representation of female politicians to date. I believe we're almost at 50%, Minister? Very close. The next election we're aiming for 50 and over. Minister Hutchins holds a range of portfolios, including industrial relations, Aboriginal affairs, and of course portfolios around women and the prevention of family violence. So please welcome Minister Hutchins.
Thank you, Emily. Can I too begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and of course future. And I had the absolute pleasure of just meeting with the Koori Youth Council yesterday, just down the road from here, and I can tell you the future of Aboriginal leadership in Victoria is in very, very good hands with them and the great work that they do. Can I thank Domestic Violence Resource Centre and RMIT for partnering today to put this seminar on, and I'm really looking forward to meeting some of you and hearing of your experiences in how the program is rolling out, but more generally hearing of and meeting some of you and hearing of your experiences out in the field as well. I'm extremely pleased to be joining you and to be supporting a seminar such as this. I've got to say, Emily, the PIP tips, you say that 10 times fast and you might be in a bit of trouble, but I think it's great that you're actually coming together and sharing experiences and learning from each other so that, you know, this is a world first in what we're doing and rolling out, and to be able to continue to improve that by sharing experiences and getting advice from each other and supporting each other, most of all, I think will only serve to better improve the program. It is such a huge task for a government and a community to take on prevention of family violence, and it's not something that as a government we're shying away from at all. And I constantly am reminding everyone in my community who might be scared at the latest home invasion crime figures that family violence is still the #1 crime issue in our society, in our community, and more prevalent in some of the communities that I represent in the Parliament. And I know what a task it is to be able to turn that around and really take the issue of prevention seriously. And of course, we need to do that at many layers as a state government in a proactive sense, whether that is with our community groups, our sporting clubs, our workplaces, and of course the fantastic work that you're assisting us to roll out in schools. We know that stopping family violence and violence against women before it occurs really is about rejecting rigid gendered roles and changing attitudes in community. And as I said, that is no small task, but it's about encouraging those positive relationships, those positive comments to thrive and develop across our communities. It's about strengthening relationships, but also about making sure relationships are equal and respectful as well. And to do this, it's essential that the work we do with children to promote gender equity and respect for one another is also at the forefront. Unfortunately, only 2 weeks ago, I came under attack by our opposition through the weekend media around a program that we have partnered with Playgroups Victoria around delivering some new prevention programs targeting young children at the age of 2, 3 and 4 around positive role modelling. And it's a program, I've got to say, it's only 6 months into its inception, and we'll be assessing it after a 12-month period, but already we're getting excellent feedback from the 300 parents whose children have participated in that program, which fundamentally looks at challenging gender stereotypes and giving different images through music and play to children about mum being at work, mum being able to play sport, dad changing nappies, all of the generalisations that are inbuilt into 3 and 4-year-olds by the time they even get to kindergarten, and challenging some of those in a very safe and playful way, and getting fantastic feedback. But unfortunately, the opposition that we have here in the state government has really questioned whether we're trying to brainwash children through these sort of programs. But of course, their set of values is quite different to ours going forward, and I think that teaching children that it's acceptable for girls and women to be able to take on any roles is a really important fundamental role in us challenging all of the stereotypes that are out there, and certainly taking on prevention of family violence. And we know that a good education is more than just about NAPLAN results, that a good education is about making sure kids feel connected, kids feel safe in their schools, and about really developing essential skills for them to become well-functioning members of our society. And I don't think anything has sharpened people's focus more about the need and support of schools to do that than the recent shooting in Florida, that mass shooting, where we now have the conversation in America happening daily around what is it that teachers are meant to be providing in the school, what is it that people are meant to be identifying as issues around wellbeing for students, and where does the responsibility from society stop at the school gate. And those conversations will no doubt continue to go on. I've got to say, I'm absolutely gobsmacked at the response of the President of the United States' response to this situation of looking at resourcing teachers by providing guns and training in the classroom. And it's just such a different world to how we operate here in Australia. But certainly the issues of respect, the issues of prevention, the issues of wellbeing are the same in any country, and something that I'm very proud that this government is committed to taking on in terms of trying to build and maintain respectful relationships both in public and private lives in order to make real change. I'm just astounded at the task that many of you in this room have in terms of the rollout. 1,000 schools signed up to this program. I think it is absolutely amazing, and this sort of program will see genuine change into the future. I mean, I don't think 20 years ago when the seatbelt safety campaign started, that 20 years later you'd have small children get into the car, and if someone doesn't have a seatbelt on, to be able to point that out and identify it. I've got kids that tell me which recycle bin things have to go into since they were in kinder. These are all the society changes that take some time to actually become everyday life. And we know that with a Respectful Relationships program rolling out in our schools, that will make a real difference going forward. I was really pleased in January to be able to launch our first action plan to support the prevention of family violence across this state, and to support the delivery of our Free from Violence plan. And I encourage you to all read that. That's available on our website through our department. And the action plan really focuses on how we're going to build both the infrastructure and the systems and the support to make sure that primary prevention is rolling out at all levels of society across Victoria to support the work that you're doing in our schools. Today, I'm really pleased to be able to further support Partners in Prevention funding, and to be able to announce a further $300,000 to support the network under the first action plan, Free from Violence, so that you can continue to do the work that you're doing here into the future. So what I'd like to do is congratulate you all for the work that you're doing to continue to support you in raising awareness of the Respectful Relationships Initiative, and to continue to support the vital work that you're all doing as practitioners to keep informed, to keep supported, to keep rolling out this program in a well-resourced and robust way, but also to be confident that the work that you are doing is really going to shape and change the future for many families and for our society now and in years to come. And I think we all share the vision for our children to grow up in a safe and respectful community, and that's pretty much why we all get out of bed every day and do what we do. So can I thank you all for your work and for your vision, and wish you luck in the seminars ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Minister. It's such exciting news. For many of you who've been involved with the network for quite some time, you'll know that we spend a significant proportion of our time cobbling together little bits and pieces of funding to continue the network, and it's been fantastic over the last 2 years to have such significant support from the Andrews government, so thank you. Partners in Prevention has got over 11 years of involvement in respectful relationships, and we've got a really long-standing history of evolving ourselves and adapting to meet the kind of changing needs of the community sector. We really think that we feel quite a unique space in respectful relationships provision in Victoria. We are not in schools like a lot of you. We are not doing the direct work of educating the students, but what we are doing is supporting practitioners from all walks of life to make sure that you've got what you need that is relevant to your school, to your local community and to your region. The funding commitment allows us to build on the existing work over the last 10 years, but it also enables us to build on and keep testing some of the approaches that we've been doing, some of the approaches using technology, some of the different ways of engaging with our stakeholders and our network members, some of the different ways that we are developing tools and resources and making sure that we're bringing that on the ground practice to a statewide context. So we're really, really excited to be able to continue to do that. And we are looking forward to sharing with you all, obviously, what the continued expansion of PIP will look like, and we'll be doing that at kind of future seminars and through the e-news. So make sure that you keep in touch.
Okay, great. So I'm really excited to introduce our panellists this morning. To the right is Libby Hargreaves. Libby works with the Department of Education and Training, leading the rollout of the government's Respectful Relationships initiative in over 75 schools in Melbourne's western suburbs. She's completed postgraduate studies in gender and has over 8 years' experience working in prevention of family violence projects in settings including maternal and child health, early childhood and local government. Libby's interest lies in developing people's gender antenna for noticing gender and gender inequality issues. In the middle is Gail McHardy. Gail is the Executive Officer of Parents Victoria, which represents and supports parents in Victorian government schools. She has worked with parents, teachers and community members from all backgrounds to navigate school, department and government policy and processes. Parents Victoria believe advancing the agenda of partnerships between families and schools and effective communication is essential to respectful relationships education in Victoria. And just to my right here is Kate Wilde. Kate is an educator, a counsellor and a development worker with over 20 years' experience working with young people, their families and communities. Kate worked in outdoor education and is a counsellor and programs coordinator before founding The Workshop with Richard Williams. She now provides programs to agencies, schools, local governments, refugee groups and community organisations around diversity, leadership, mental health and adolescent development. So please welcome our speakers. Just to get started and just, I suppose, to help everyone get to know you, do you want to start by just telling us all a bit about the engagement that you've had with Respectful Relationships education and how you got involved in that work? Maybe we'll start with you, Libby.
Sure. So I've been working with the Respectful Relationships education project that's been rolled out by the Department of Education and Training. So I've been in that role for the last 12 months when the project started. Prior to that, I was doing Respectful Relationships work in maternal child health, so overseeing a program called Baby Makes 3 that some of you might be familiar with. So it's looking at bringing a gender lens, I guess, to parenting relationships and looking at respectful relationships in that context, given that we know that's a peak time for family violence to often first occur or to escalate. So yeah, I guess, and then my background's sort of nursing, but I've always had an interest in prevention, I guess, having seen all the issues from a hospital perspective. So over my career, I've sort of then moved into health promotion and sort of public health, so came at it from that angle. Yep.
Thanks, Libby. Gail.
From Parents Victoria perspective, when the initiative was originally announced by our Minister, obviously as an education stakeholder, the Minister's office was in contact with us in relation to the announcement and rollout. And obviously right from the beginning we had questions in relation about how parents would go on the journey and those conversations. So we've been intrinsic and having conversations with the Department of Education through that space. What probably has been the next wave is in relation about how we support families at the school level when schools work with the program and how best they navigate those conversations with in partnership with families. So that's the bigger piece of work, which I'm really looking forward to the discussion today and hearing the voices, because I know there's some great work and some pockets, but I know there's also some challenges for our practitioners and for our leaders as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Kate?
So from a youth work background, I think there was probably some studies came out in the late 90s, early 2000s about relationships between adolescent boys and girls. And as part of just being a youth service provider for what was then Manningham Youth and Family Services, we developed some programs to run in high schools then. Probably the next step, I do a lot of work with the Migrant Information Centre with refugees and newly arrived migrant families, and we find that just culturally there's a lot of kind of traditional patriarchy in those cultures, and then coming to Australia can be a bit of a challenge to work through that stuff for everybody, mums and dads and kids. So we started developing some programs for EAL and culturally and linguistically diverse families. So doing that stuff, direct service delivery for the Migrant Information Centre, which we still do. I'm missing one of those today. The most recent one, and the one I think I'm here to talk about the most, is last year when they were rolling out the pilot clusters for the quadruple R program. Was working with Montmorency Primary School and a few other ones to develop some ways of talking about this in schools. And the program that we did there last year was working with student action teams and a parent action team around discussing and challenging gender equity issues in schools.
So community partnerships is a key focus of the Partners in Prevention program, and it's one of the 6 key elements in the whole school approach that's being rolled out across Victorian schools at the moment. This includes strong relationships with community organisations that specialise in promoting gender equality and prevention of violence, but it's also about empowering families and carers as key partners. I'm really keen to hear about why each of you think that engaging with parents and families is important to this work, and particularly why it's important to ensuring the success of respectful relationships education. Gail, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll kick this off. This is a very hot topic, and as you said in your intro, it's not just here, it's global. Because from our perspective, it's the big missing piece of the work, particularly, now I'm going to come very much from an education perspective and a community perspective, but I just want to impress upon people that we need to impress upon our policymakers, our government officials, our departments, our schools, that everything they need to do, if they get the community and family engagement piece right, the other rest will flow. If you have a relationship, if you have authentic partnerships with the people on the local level in those school communities, we know from, I'm sure Kate and Libby would certainly have those experiences when talking to those people, that when you've got that trusted relation, that confidence, parents and carers feel self-empowered to have those conversations. So what I would say, I'm just going to throw a challenge in here, is that parents say to us all the time is about, how do I have that conversation? I can have this conversation in my home with my friends, but when I go into the school place, I have to navigate all that education language, and who am I? I'm just a parent. So it's about how we impress upon the educators and leaders in our systems, as I say, and government officials and policymakers, about to how we take people on the journey and how we value and respect, and I'm really say that strongly, respect the funds of knowledge of parents and carers, because they are the first educators. They are with that child from birth. They know all the irks and quirks, but sometimes they have difficulty in having those conversations. So that's why people like you in the room are so highly valued, because you're the support mechanisms to do that. So yeah, I'll probably leave it at that, but it's certainly, there's actually probably close to 50 years of research, evidence-based research around the parental engagement, but unfortunately the focus is always around literacy, numeracy, results and student outcomes. But if we could do the other bit, that other stuff would just happen naturally.
Yeah, I think so as you pointed out, the community partnerships is one of the 6 key areas of the project. So it's something that we've sort of been promoting right from the start, and right when we did our first school induction, then it was starting to have those conversations with the schools to think about how they're going to bring families and carers and guardians along on this journey of doing respectful relationships. We're always sort of saying, it's all very well to have respectful relationships happening in a school, but then if that child goes home and if that message then isn't being reinforced by the family, then we're going to be limited in terms of its impact. So yeah, we're just starting to do a lot more work with schools now in terms of how they reach their parents. I guess tapping into the existing ways that they already engage parents, but also challenging them to find new ways or to strengthen those partnerships as well, and talk to parents about how they can have the conversation around respectful relationships. We're at a parent information night last night. 3 of our schools had a combined parent information night, and very much the conversation was there was unpacking some of the key concepts that we covered in the 4 hours, and so they can have those sort of car conversations and on the way home then with with their children, you know, backing that sort of up. So I guess equipping parents to be able to have those conversations and to know what their students are learning each week, so then they can be, following that up at home.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Maybe just feeding briefly on what Gail said. I mean, I also run parent and carer sessions in schools, and you can have anything from 3 parents turn up at some to 300. So finding a way to make it worthwhile for parents to come out at the end of a busy day and attend something and get something useful for themselves. But the other thing is, you know, you can do a great job of teaching something and you come back the next Friday and there's little Jimmy saying, yeah, but my dad said, and then you're like, oh, you know, that whole hour we spent last week has been undone. So actually explaining why dad or mum or parent or carer might have a different conversation. And so often parents are really receptive. They're like, I hadn't thought of it, I didn't know. So it's not even that there's a lot of resistance, it's just that maybe they haven't had these discussions.
Yeah. I also think it's worth noting as well the importance of parents getting that message. It's something, again, that we've been thinking a bit about within Partners in Prevention. We still don't have the answers yet, but just thinking about how Respectful Relationships is a program that's reaching parents as a primary prevention initiative, not just focused on students in schools. Gail, I'm really curious to know specifically what parents want to know about respectful relationships and what's happening in the schools. Can you talk a bit about that?
Often when schools are messaging out, and Kate says a very valid point, parents need to know what's in it for them, and they also need to know if they're going to commit that time, and there's competing demands on their time, is that it's going to be valued and that they're going to go away with some practical solution, as you pointed out. So in relation to the conversation about what they should be messaging about this particular program and the benefits of the program, is about making sure that they have, giving them the strategies, because when they go away, they're going to debrief with their own sort of family members, you know, whoever else in the network, and they're going to have like the dad that's a bit the naysayer, or possibly a mum, or the auntie or grandma, and say, what are you talking about? This is, you know, really, you know, and we've heard all the negativity, and we support this program so much that we just got to get the message through that please be open to the conversation. And to be open to the conversation, say what your fears are so we can talk them through, and what the benefits are to these young people, because the young people are telling us what the benefits are. So I think it's about also trying to bring them into the conversation too, and about how this is so important to them for the future. But I think more importantly, is giving some strategies around knowing what the fears are, and often some people are not wanting to hear what the fear is. So how can we give the strategies to people that are going to be leading the conversations to do that effectively, and people like here, your experts, particularly in the work that Resource Centre does, and the work the colleagues beside me are doing. So if we can have those easy responses factored into the teachers and leaders to share with the parents, and then demystify some of those fears. And that's often what it is, it's the unknown.
Libby, are there particular schools that concerns that the schools that you work with have around engaging with parents or with the wider community in their Respectful Relationships work?
I think a lot of the concerns tie into what Gail's just mentioned in terms of just the broader challenges that schools have in terms of being able to engage parents. So as we keep saying, every school is unique. So we've noticed significant variation, I guess, between the 80 schools that we're working with in terms of how they engage parents. So primary schools are already often doing a lot more and find that a lot easier, and because you've got parents there twice a day doing pick up and drop off. In secondary schools that can be harder. Also looking at, for specialist schools, like a lot of our specialist schools have very little contact with their parents. Their catchment areas are often really large. Students are often arriving by bus, so they might only see parents maybe once a year. And then also the difference between our Catholic and independent schools and government schools as well. So the parent night that I mentioned that we presented at last night had really great attendance, but it was also 3 independent schools where perhaps the parents are a bit more invested in turning up when you're, you know, paying significantly more for education. So yes, I guess then that variation. They have some schools have some concerns around, I guess, the backlash of doing respectful relationships, but I must say that's been less than what I expected it to be when we first came into this role. And actually we found a lot of the schools that we're working with, and I guess we are sort of working with the earlier adopters of respectful relationships, but on the whole feel quite confident of being able to defend why they need to do respectful relationships and why that's really important. They've got a long history of doing this work, but also other programs such as drug ed and sex ed that they've also had to justify, I guess, and explain to parents. So they're used to having to communicate on that. I guess then our tact has been to engage students has then been to really focus on the why we need to do it as the starting point of that conversation. And, you know, if you're starting with some of those concerning statistics around mental health and bullying, as well as family violence, as well as gender-based violence more broadly, then really there's, I think, very few parents who wouldn't get that argument and then see the importance of why we need to be doing respectful relationships.
Kate, in your work with Montmorency Primary School last year, you set up 3 action teams to conduct research and take action around respectful relationships. Can you tell us a bit more about this, particularly what the school was looking for in engaging you to do this work, and what kind of approach you took?
Yeah, so Monty's a terrific little school. They're open to trying new things. We actually set up 5 student action teams and 1 parent action team. So student action teams have been around for over a decade. Roger Holdsworth, who's a failed retiree, I was working with him yesterday, established them, and it's looking at the fact that students have valuable skills and can do meaningful and important things in their schools. Even with the talk with teachers yesterday, we were talking about the concept of students evaluating teachers, and some of the teachers found that a bit shocking until we all remembered that when we were in primary school and high school, we all knew who kind of the garbage teachers were as well. So students have certain knowledge that teachers might not have, and we can use that knowledge within the school. What Monty did that's a bit interesting is they actually let me set up a parent action team, which is the same thing, get a group of parents to work on an issue that the parents thought was interesting. So what happens is you get about 5 or 6 kids or parents in a team, and you start off with wondering. So the concept with this was like respect for relationships, gender equity. So that's the broad thing, but you can really do it with anything. What do we wonder? What do we know? Who can we ask are the 3 questions. So the kids were stuff like, well, we wonder why there's not many girls in the coding club. We wonder whether boys and girls can be friends without being teased. We wonder if boys and girls share sporting grounds on school equally. We wonder about these things. What do we know? Well, we know this stuff. Who can we ask? The parents were a bit shocked, I think, because they thought they were going to be working with their kids. And then they got there and I'm like, oh, no, you're working together. Yeah. So they had to kind of adjust to that a little bit, but they did really well. Great job. And they wondered a few things. The first thing they wondered was why when they have working bees, the dads are all outside and the mums are all inside. But they weren't going to tackle that as their first issue. They wondered what words parents were using to praise their kids. Yeah, so that's what they wondered. The point of the parent action team is to actually also link between what the school's doing and that whole pick-up time, drop-off time discussion that happens. And you mentioned briefly about backlash, but there was questions and concerns our parent group had that when I went and talked to the principal about them, she's like, well, no one's ever talked to me about that. Yeah. Do you want me to go on and tell about the survey?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, go on.
So our parent action team came up with a survey. They administered it to all students grade 3, 4, 5, 6, and it had a list of 30 words. What words are used to praise you, basically? And they gave it to all the kids, and kids really like doing a survey. They're much better than adults in that way. So they were all super keen to fill it in, and they got the results, and about 3 of the words were very similar, okay, which says a little bit, I think, about Monty. It's a pretty good school already in thinking about this stuff, but there are also some words that were different. Then they asked the kids, well, are you happy? Are you happy about the words that are used to praise you? 60% of kids said, yeah, I'm really happy, but 40%, which is a significant amount, said, no, I'd like different words. The girls wanted fast and strong, and the boys wanted honest. Yeah. And if you think about the way that we can talk and treat kids at a primary school level, you know, girls are pretty little dress, you've got your hair, yeah, and we maybe don't focus on that sporting stuff as much, although that's clearly changing. But again, if you look at expulsion and you know, rates of expulsion and that amongst young men are treated for acting out a lot more than young women. So it was interesting that these boys were like, oh, I want to be seen as honest. I want to be seen like as I'm a good guy. So that was really interesting. And then the next step, they're doing it again this year, so we'll build on what we've got. The next step is, okay, how do we start to set some challenges for the parent community in a way that's not too confronting about thinking about the words you use around their kids. And even me, I mean, I'm in this sector, but it was interesting even that weekend I saw my niece and nephew, and I immediately went to say to my niece, oh, don't you have a pretty dress on? I was like, oh, hang on, never say stuff like that to my nephew. So even for me, it was making me just double think the words that I was using outside of the program.
Thank you. And our other speaker that we were hoping to have today was actually someone who was on the Parent Action Group, action team that Kate was facilitating. I was hoping maybe in her absence you could share a little bit about how the school got parents involved with that work.
Yeah, so two main ways. They did the whole send stuff home in the communication folder, and they got some parents who put their hand up straight away. But then, of course, probably with most schools, they tapped a couple of parents on the shoulder who they thought might be interested and might be keen. So we had 5 parents, 4 mums and 1 dad, who came along. We did 2 training sessions first with the students all together, so they also had to play ball games and stuff like that. It's been a while since some of those parents have played any of those games. And then they worked in teams together around their question. The thing that they found, even at the time working with the students in the room, so we do an activity where like agree, disagree, whatever else, and you know, agree, disagree, if a boy's sad at school, he can cry. And even our boys, our beautiful, gentle boys, were like, oh, no, you can't really do that. And it was so interesting watching these parents' reactions, like they were almost teary, like they didn't realise that we still weren't quite there. Do you know what I mean? So that was pretty cool, because then that's the thing they can go and talk about at pick-up time, like, you know, no, we're not, it's not, you know, we're not Andrew Bolt, we're not freaking out here. We just say that if boy's sad, he should be able to cry, and if a girl wants to be fast, she should be able to be fast.
Yeah, I've heard so many great stories about what schools are doing and what community organisations are doing with schools. I wanted to share a couple of examples, and I hope Gail and Libby that you might have some to share as well. One school that we know about that's been working, a lead school near Ballarat, put on a launch day for their Respectful Relationships program. So they invited all of their parents and community to come to the school for a barbecue. They had fun activities. They did what we call a redraw the balance activity. I think a lot of you have seen the video where you ask children to draw pictures of certain professions that might be typically quite gendered, and then invite people from those professions in to potentially challenge some of those stereotypes, which sounds like it was a really great success. I think we've got a link to a news article about that in our next e-bulletin with a bit more information. I've also know of a few schools who are sending homework activities from the 4R activities home with students to do with their parents, and I think that's also a really nice way of bringing parents into the work. Libby, I wonder if there's any examples from your schools that you'd like to share.
Yeah, so some of our lead schools are doing things like using their school newsletter, so the teacher will write a brief description of some of the 4Rs activities that they've been doing in the classroom that week or that month, and then they followed that up with quotes from every single student in that classroom of then how they'd found that lesson or that series of lessons, and the quotes had each of the students' names written against it as well, so then the parents could sort of see what their own child had written. Quite a few schools are doing, like the parent information nights that I mentioned, or using school assemblies to then showcase some of the activities again from the 4Rs, or to talk about the work that's happened. There seems to be sort of a bit of a theme of very much bringing students' voice into that, so maybe students demonstrating the activities or sharing their experience of what that was like to go through those lessons. Another one of our schools in their school reports, so they didn't start assessing respectful relationships last year, but they did put a bit of a statement in each student's report saying what they'd learnt around respectful relationships, and so it sort of prompted then that discussion at the parent-teacher interview night. as well. And then just other examples of showcasing students' work around the classroom. A lot of our schools have put respectful relationships information up on their websites. We're also, in terms of the curriculum rolling out, encouraging our schools to involve parents in that in a range of ways. So it might be making the learning materials accessible either on the website or having them available for parents to come and view in the classroom, or also, what was the other example? Oh, just having like open classrooms. So quite a few of our schools are inviting parents in to come and watch some of the respectful relationships lessons as well.
Our students and parents can be the leaders in their school community, and they can be the advocates, the ambassadors. So if they're on board and they can see the benefit and the impacts as we're talking about, it's about how we empower them and give them permission to share that voice. So I just love the work of the action teams and things like that, because that's when you're actually having authentic conversations.
One thing that we know, one approach that some schools are taking, and one way of engaging the school community is around respectful relationships, is to focus on respect as a universal value, potentially playing down the gendered lens. And I'm really curious to know your thoughts on this as an approach. Libby, I wonder if you can tell us, do you feel like that approach detracts from the primary prevention message, or can it be useful, and is there a way to tailor that?
I think we've been mindful in Western Melbourne of very much still pushing the gendered nature of violence and still bringing that gendered lens. We sort of say to our schools, most schools have a value of respect as one of their school values, and schools have been doing work around respect for decades, and that's been really important work, but we also haven't seen a reduction in family violence or gender-based violence as a result of that. So unless we go there and actually have a conversation around the gendered nature of violence, then we're not going to make a difference on that. So so we very much have included that in all of our professional development. Then that's absolutely sort of been a focus, or at least mentioned as part of it. And we, like for example, when we roll out the 4 Rs, so the learning material, professional development to schools, we actually then allocate a bit more time for the topics 7 and 8, which are the 2 gendered topics in the materials that the schools will be teaching, in recognition of, though, that this is the new bit for schools. They've been doing sort of the other topics 1 to 6 for a long time, which talk about generally building resilience and respect. But it's that gendered nature. So I guess we're saying that it's important, but also recognising that that's a bit of a new area for many schools, where there's perhaps less confidence. So they're making sure that's backed up with a lot of extra support and additional PD for that, and even standalone PD just on those sort of topics a lot.
In terms of the gendered stuff, yes, universal respect, but if you ask any kid what respect means, they'll say something like, oh, don't touch other people's property, or it means being respectful. I hear this every week, people. That's what respect is, it's being respectful. So that's clearly not enough.
Gail, do you have any advice for schools or the community practitioners supporting them around bringing parents along on the respectful relationships journey, particularly bringing that gendered lens into it?
Okay, so in a recent conversation with the department, again late last year, and looking about the support they were giving to teachers in relation in the classroom. So when Libby was talking about the open classroom idea, we would even bump that up further and saying, with the permission of certain schools, where they could actually film snippets and snapshots of the exchange between educators and children in that discussion, and then have that accessible online in obviously safe places with some parameters around that for whatever reason. But again, it's the accessible, the access to have a look, and then if people just then see that, go, because film visuals are powerful, particularly the voices of children. They're not as hung up as the adults. So when adults feel that and see that, they go, oh, really? What am I stressed about, So we've got to amplify the positives. I'm saying this to the department all the time. I know everyone's really sensitive. I understand that people, they're nervous, they want to get votes. But if you're genuine and you sign up to this commitment, you need to deliver and do it together. I like to be a little bit, push the envelope a little bit more and say that, You know, we need to grab those snapshots and amplify that out to the community so they realise there's nothing to fear. But more importantly, it has great value and benefit to our future generations. More and more we need to work in it's sort of like we run alongside each other, schools here and all the allied professional support services on the outside, and having to bang on the door to get in. It needs to be a fluid relationship, because you're all there to support, and parents need that support.
The other thing we've got to remember is that last year the pilot of respect for relationships happened in the context of the marriage equality survey. It happened with Corey Bernardi freaking out about boys in dresses, which turned out really well. It happened in the context of the backlash against safe schools. And plus it also happened, with the child safe policies coming into schools. And as much as if you work in the industry, you know what those three things are. If you're a parent, they all sound like the same thing. So even schools putting in child safe, which is about protecting children from predators, parents are like, why are you putting in child safe? Because they think it's safe schools. And the same thing's happening with, it's true, the same thing's happening with respect for relationships. One of the things I get to do is teach puberty. But the only questions I've ever had from parents' concerns is, are you going to teach my child about sex? Ever since I've started teaching it. Until last year was when we were having parents contacting the schools, wanting to sit in on a lesson and saying, what are you teaching my child about gender identity? Because of the hysteria in some of the media. So I think that will die down, but we are kind of taking this out in the historical context of that.
We know that all schools and communities are different, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all way to do this work, and that includes engaging with parents. So I wonder if, from your experience, from each of your experiences really, if there are any particular important considerations for engaging with parents from specific school settings. For example, Libby, you mentioned specialist schools and the difference between pick up and drop off and that sort of thing. And I'm also interested, I suppose, as other examples from faith-based communities or specialist schools in really cultural diverse communities. Any particular considerations? Gail, yeah.
I'm just going to challenge a bit about what people understand about what the needs and wants of parents are in those variety of spaces and facilities. There's an assumption out there that those parents may, not as, there's the whole debate around apathy, lack of interest, they've got too much on their plate, all those sort of things. So that, from my conversations with parents, they all want to know the same things. So it's again about, Karen Mapp from the United States talks about, I'm sure you've talked to educators, and as people would understand about that whole language around hard to reach parents. We need to flip it. It's about the accessible institutions.
So again, I do a lot of work with the Migrant Information Centre, and I think it's finding the practical accessibility, which is, if you don't have a car, can we get you there? Can we give you a taxi voucher? Can we provide a bus? If you have kids and there's no one at home to look after them, can we give you childcare? If we're running parent care information nights at 6 o'clock, can we feed everybody so that that's not so that's the practical stuff, but it's also the psychological stuff. Like, we're going to make sure that we have interpreters for you. We're going to really work hard to make sure there's just not one interpreter for the main language group. But I did a parent night a while back with 5 interpreters. Took a really long time, but it was really well received. The parents were really grateful to have it there. But even psychologically, to respect where people have come from.
We've just been doing some sort of intersectional professional development, both as an RR workforce. Many of us who are here today did that a couple of weeks ago, and then also rolling that out to our schools. So I guess then, and the starting point for that that we were challenged with personally, that then we're sort of passing on to our schools, is that then recognising our own attitudes and assumptions and biases as a starting point. So often I think we are making a lot of assumptions. Quite a few of our schools, they're in the western suburbs, are incredibly culturally diverse, so the schools are very aware of needing to tailor what they do and make sure that it's as inclusive as possible. But sometimes there's also some assumptions around that as well. So I guess as a bit of a starting point, we're about to roll out our community practices with schools, then doing activities of sort of checking ourselves, I guess, first. Often we sort of other people in terms of when we talk about, you know, whether it's culture or LGBTIQ status or that sort of thing. So I guess be mindful of that. And also because I think the learning materials that the teachers are using are fairly inclusive, but they could always be more so, but they do tend to ask open-ended questions and present a range of scenarios that then students are working with, but I guess it's all on the delivery, and there could be a tendency to sort of narrow that down. So being mindful of keeping those questions open-ended. And so when we talk about what does respect look like, I mean, in some cultures then it's the eye contact and the handshake, but in a lot of cultures then that's actually highly disrespectful. So, you know, making sure those conversations are happening as well.
This conversation is really interesting because in my consultation around Australia to date, the issue of parent and community contact's been really high on people's agenda. I'm interested in, I think my own experience as a teacher is that the job of contacting and inviting in the community is quite different in primary and secondary schools. So I'm interested in teasing that out a bit with your experiences in those different contexts.
Really good question, because the community conversations we did at the end of last year, we did a secondary setting and primary settings, and we did a cultural setting, and interesting parents from both, you know, because I have children often in both, and early childhood as well. In the secondary setting, it was affording the opportunities in smaller groups and targeting about, so there was a couple of parents at the table that talked about that. We're talking about like numeracy and maths programs and science programs. So it was interesting. One of the dads was a real tech head, real science focused, and that was his area of profession. And he said, and his understanding, his takeouts of the messages from the teachers was very different to another dad across the table. You know, I don't know any of that. How come you get that message and I don't? We're getting the same information. So then the school, they're pretty much doing a real focus around the family engagement stuff. That's part of their stuff around, I don't want to get into the acronyms of education state speak, but FISO and building the trust relationship with community engagement. But what I would say is the school need to look at their targets and their strategy in relation about what they're trying to message in the areas they're trying to lift. So, for example, in the work that was being done at Monty, for example, I would also encourage Monty Primary about how then do they do the link with the secondary feeder schools to continue that conversation, for example. Drug education, whatever it might be, whatever the topic, about how do we link the two, because they're all in networks. I mean, I can only talk for the government sector, but when I talk to my colleagues in the other sectors, I'd also would be, you know, and this is a bit on the fly, some of this stuff I'm telling you now, but it's about, again, putting the parent lens and about how, what again is going to get those conversations started. And it's really interesting, you know, parents want to talk about the balance of technology. And then obviously some parents are all over it and they think, well, that's the future, we've got to have the conversation. But at the same token, some people are really big on just making sure the kids are happy and safe at school and learning and engaged, and then that's not the priority for them. So just in answer to your question about those settings, I think it's really important in those structures of systems that both are talking to each other and they share with each other. In fact, we do that with preschool to school, but we don't necessarily keep that journey going because it's on a learning continuum.
So just with the primary schools, one of the things that we've worked with parent attendance is for the kids to have something to show. So they might be in student action teams or do an expo, and then we use their NAG power to get their parents there. Like, you've got to come see what I've done. And we find that we'll get 90% turn up of parents most of the time, which is really useful. Secondary schools are really different. Any of you who are parents know that your kid loves you being there in primary school and you're nothing but a shock, horror, embarrassment in secondary school. So again, what we would do is maybe try and hop onto existing events that we know have good turnout, like start of the year assembly, camp information nights, anything that the school goes, yeah, we tend to get good turn up. Well, let's just like sneak a little whatever we need in there that we also think it would be useful for parents to know, and then hopefully build some discussions there that you can follow up after. Again, teachers are time poor, so maybe, you know, if you've got an existing event, that's sometimes a good way to do it.
What is one thing that you would like to see happen in respect for relationships education over the next 12 months? Just another little question. Anyone want to start with it off?
So I was talking about this with my board the other day. I suppose we have some concerns that respectful relationships will be like all other mandated curriculum, and some schools will do it really, really well, and some schools will tick a box. So finding a way to leverage that, provide enough resources and time for teachers to attend enough PD, and make sure that that's done really well, so it's not like, oh, my kid got an hour of respectful relationships and we're done. And I know that there are different standards and stuff like that, but it'll be interesting with the rollout. The second thing that I'd like to see is around more student and parent directed action around this stuff. I think when we put curriculum in schools, it can be very easy for that to become stagnant, whereas if we throw the question back to parents, and particularly kids before their frontal lobes are developed, we don't know what we're going to find out, which is a lot more interesting, a little more scary, but a lot more interesting and definitely more relevant. And then to keep sharing that amongst the professional community, I mean, that would be my ideal case scenario.
For me, I'd actually challenge the learning institutions before the teachers get into schools, so pre-service and in-service and return to service, embedding in their learning a relation about how we embed this in the DNA of all teachers, regardless of what sector they go to teach in that regard, because that would be the ultimate for me.
Would be great.
And I'm going to say something that's quite obvious, which is around funding. So I guess I can't avoid it. But just, you know, yeah, an ongoing funding of the department's rollout of respectful relationships. I think, you know, we're at a stage where schools are sort of 6 to 12 months into their journey, depending if they're a lead or partner school. And we're starting to see some really exciting changes in terms of staff buy-in, the respectful relationships rollout starting to happen. Schools being really creative and innovative with what they're doing, and I guess now we're starting to see that work reach students, because I guess the focus initially is that buy-in of school leadership and staff. So now it's a greater focus on reaching students and engaging them in that work, and student leaders, and then parents as well. That then to see that groundwork, I guess, come to fruition would be a hope for 12 months and beyond.